Hey, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Inner Alchemy, the science of spiritual living. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most effective techniques that I've seen in working with the six dimensions of wellness in a holistic and evidence-based approach. And I'm really excited that the person that we have with us is someone who's not only like a little brother to me, who is a a leader and visionary and an innovator that some of you may already know, but who's involved in bringing this approach to the marketplace, so that those of you who might be watching, who are practitioners in a holistic field, who are practitioners in a counseling field, who are just practitioners in wellness in general, whether that's massage therapy or Reiki. I think you might find some really interesting information as we dive in with Mitch Gainey, who's in Australia. Mitch, it's great to have you here with us. And what I'd love to have happen is rather than me read off your bio, tell us a little bit about you and about your journey.
Yeah, well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much, Dr. Salvato. Uh, yeah, so it's really cool to be here. A little bit about me and my journey. So, yeah, I'm based in Australia. My background has been in the counseling and community development space. So, I started working with foster kids and then I started moving into the youth homelessness area. And I did that for about 10 years, working in crisis settings. Did a bit of a stint working with torture and trauma survivors from refugee backgrounds. And all through that that space, that time period, I was working with people in groups and one to one, and yeah, that was kind of the impetus for me going on this journey of finding something that would actually help my clients heal from trauma. Because a lot of the young people, particularly that I was working with, were saying that they didn't want to go and do talk therapy anymore. It didn't work. It wasn't helping them. They still felt like crap, and it was a waste of their time. And, I tried to toe the party line a little bit and be like, no, no, you still need to go. And it's really important. But I kind of got what they were saying because, these young people were in crisis. They didn't really care about sitting around talking about their feelings so much and trying to figure it out. And in my own life, one as a worker in that field, it's a stressful job. There's a big thing around burnout or vicarious trauma. And I also had my own crap because my very scientific theory is that anyone who goes into the helping work, the counseling or coaching work, we're all messed up. We all go into it to try and sort ourselves out through sorting everyone else out. So I kind of, went on my journey to go, what works? What actually helps people heal from trauma? Which has led me up to this point.
Yeah, and you squeezed in that amount that some people would say um, sounds like a life's work. Like there are 50, 60-year-old entrepreneurs who are in the field who haven't accomplished a fraction of what you've done, and who haven't realized that all of us that are in the mental wellness space are generally here because we're pursuing mental wellness ourselves. But let's talk about sort of the bridging the gap when we talk about evidence-based EFT. Um, can for those who may not have any idea of what EFT is in general, but even more specifically for those who don't understand the profound difference in what evidence-based
Mm.
EFT is compared to maybe something they've seen on YouTube or on Facebook, and how it aligns with other evidence-based practices.
Yeah. Yeah. So I specifically train people in and practice what's called clinical EFT. And that kind of comes under the banner or the brand of evidence-based EFT, the work of Dr. Peter Stapleton. But for those who have no idea what EFT is, it started, well, the origins are in something called thought field therapy. So thought field therapy was started by Roger Callahan, I think in the 70s or something like that. And Roger was a counselor, And kind of a similar story to my own. He was working one to one with people, and he was getting results for people, but he had this one client in particular who had a water phobia. And unfortunately for her, to get to his office, she had to walk past his pool to get into his office. So she was always triggered by the time she got in. And he was kind of at a loss. He's like, nothing that I'm doing with this client is working, and was feeling a bit deflated. And at the same time, he was studying. He just started to dabble in traditional Chinese medicine, acupressure. And I think the night before, he'd read about a particular spot here, an acupressure spot that was to do with fear. And he did that thing that we often do as counselors or workers or coaches of some form, where we're like, oh, I don't really know how to sort this out, but I'll give this a crack and see what happens, even though we always pretend we know exactly what we're doing. And as she was talking, he just got her to tap on this spot. And then by the end of the session, she kind of looked at him a bit funny and then got up and walked to his pool and looked at his pool and noted that she wasn't feeling any distress. And then she jumped into the pool and started swimming and kind of had this, hallelujah moment where she didn't have this fear of water anymore. And that kind of started him on this journey of what the heck is this, and how do I make it something more that I can do in my practice. And he developed thought field therapy, which is a very similar basis to EFT, but essentially you tap on certain acupressure points while thinking of an issue. So he developed that, and then someone else came along and went, this is all a little bit too complicated, because thought field therapy had different sequences. And Gary Craig was his name, came along, and he was an engineer from Harvard and said, let's just put it into a simple system. So EFT basically works by tapping on certain acupressure points on the face and the body to reduce distress and stress. And that kind of happened in the 90s. And the way that we talked about it, or the way that it was spoken about back then, was that it helped balance your energy, that it worked with meridians. And Gary didn't really talk about chakras, but he talked about meridians and helping your energy system heal. And people were getting results. People were overcoming lifelong traumas, phobias, distress, cravings and addictions. And there became this kind of little EFT tapping community / cult that were very passionate about it. But it was really easily dismissed by the kind of psychological community and the scientific community, because it was a bunch of mostly Americans talking about energy systems and tapping on their face. And it looks weird and it looks bizarre. When I first heard of it, I was like, what a load of crap. But then, because it was getting so many results, a few psychologists started practicing it. And Dr. Peter Stapleton came along. So she's an amazing Australian woman over at Bond University, kind of one of the world's leading researchers in what exactly is EFT doing, how does it work, does it actually work? And she kind of put the science behind it. So what we can say about EFT is primarily it is a stress reduction tool. And it's a kind of combination of CBT, or exposure therapy. So you are working on a cognitive level, mostly through that kind of exposure model and working with cognitions, acceptance and commitments therapy, and somatic therapies, because you're working directly with the brain and the body rather than the mind, if I can make that distinction. And what you're doing is essentially bringing up your distress. So thinking of the issue, the problem that you have. And as you're kind of tapping on various acupressure points in the body, what we can say happens is that a signal gets sent through what we think is the collagen system and what is called the primovascular system to the amygdala, which is kind of your smoke detector, the part of your brain that tells you to stress out, freak out. It sends a signal to the amygdala to calm down or to downregulate. And as the amygdala calms down and downregulates, the rest of the brain can do its job of processing stress and fear. Because when we get overstressed, which most of us are in the modern world, or we have a significant stress slash trauma, the amygdala is firing so much chemicals and fear signals into the body that the hippocampus and the rest of the brain can't actually process it properly. So it kind of gets stuck, for lack of a better word, or incomplete. There's an incomplete survival response, and then the amygdala kind of gets stuck on and is constantly sending that stress signal to the body. And then you just have this backlog of stress and traumatic events, which then, as we know, turns into sickness, poor relationships, a whole bunch of things. EFT essentially works by calming the amygdala, which then calms the body and allows the brain to do what it can do and what it's evolved and designed to do, which is heal and help us come back to safety. To answer your other question around why is clinical EFT and evidence-based EFT different to maybe some of the stuff you see on the YouTubes, EFT works by being very specific. And it's kind of hard to be very specific on a generic video where you're tapping for an audience of thousands or millions, depending on how big their audience is. And so what you often see on YouTube is what some of us might refer to as just social media tapping. And there's often a lot of positive affirmations, kind of NLP rewiring, talking yourself through a problem. And there's nothing wrong with that. People love it. People swear by it. What we would say from a clinical standpoint is that it doesn't get to the root, and it's unlikely that that will have kind of a long-term effect unless it is also backed up by kind of one-to-one specific clinical approaches, which is essentially going, let's face the issue. Let's be really honest. Let's not try and make it pretty by saying pretty words to ourselves. Let's speak the truth as we know it, which might be, even though I have this anxiety in my chest, or even though I've got this fear, or even though, this terrible thing happened to me, I can love and accept myself. And as we work with the negative cognition or the thing that's triggering us, and we just stick with it and we presence it and keep ourselves calm with the tapping, that gets to the root. And that is what has all the research behind it. So specifically clinical evidence-based EFT is the approach that works. That's the one that will get to the core of trauma. That's what will help memory reconsolidation, trauma healing, and has so many profound impacts that it's hard to kind of fit in.
Sure, I appreciate that, and I want to go a little bit deeper with something that a couple of things that you said. For the clinicians that might be watching and those in allopathic medical fields, as well as holistic medical fields, one of the things he said that I think often gets overlooked that is a substantial difference between what you call social media tapping, kind of general tapping, which, as you said, is beautiful, has its purpose, is effective for what it can do, compared to evidence-based clinical EFT, is not only the research and science that backs it up, but the fact that as you shift from the left side of the brain, the fear side of the brain, the thinking side of the brain, to the knowing side of the brain, which this helps to do, you're by down regulating that fight or flight syndrome. Science knows that doing that in general is going to lower your cortisol levels.
Yeah.
Um, there's medical evidence of clinical EFT doing that. Could you speak about that for a couple minutes?
Yeah, so there's kind of been two major studies around the kind of immediate biological markers or changes that EFT can produce. So one was done quite a few years ago, and it was an hour of group tapping. So they did basically cortisol saliva tests before and after, and they found that there was a 36% reduction in cortisol in the saliva, uh, just from an hour of group tapping. They then repeated that study, uh, maybe 2020, I think it was, or a bit more recently, and they found it was up to 46%. So we can see that EFT, clinical EFT, that is actually addressing the fear response, um, has a significant immediate effect in people. Uh, so to think that you could be working with someone in either active acute trauma or lifelong kind of chronic stress and have an immediate reduction of 46% reduction in cortisol in just an hour, and then thinking of how is that going to then show up in their felt sense and their lived expression, is pretty profound. And I'd say that's what I've seen in my clients is EFT has an immediate felt impact, which gives people hope. We can also see through the work of Dr. Peter Stapleton, there's, I think it's 72 genes start expressing differently in that hour of tapping. Immune system markers go up 113%. Often when you're in stress, your immune system's quite low. Yeah, whole bunch of different responses in just an hour of tapping, all through tapping on your face and saying a
And
few
that's
things.
and that's in a group setting. So
Yeah.
imagine, the increased benefit when you're tapping specifically and uniquely for that person. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is that this is not a technique that requires belief. Because if we're talking about the central nervous system and downregulation of stressors, moving out of fight or flight, you don't have to believe that that stuff works for it to work. And if those who are listening and say, well, that doesn't sound right, think about when the last time that you were scared, did you have to believe that you could get scared to get scared?
Mm.
I mean, that's not so. So this would be effective regardless of whether what a person's belief was.
Yeah, so it's definitely not placebo effect. There have been some studies on that, even though we're kind of reframing how we think about placebo anyway. But it works regardless of whether you or your client believes in it. Obviously, if there's a lot of hesitation, uh, that might be something that you're working through. But pretty much everyone that I know who is passionate about EFT started off thinking it was a load of crap. Everyone I know, I just came back from 10 days working in remote communities in Western Australia. We were going around supporting people working in Indigenous communities over there to learn EFT. And there was a team of four of us, and all of our introductions were basically, when I came across the EFT, I thought it was the weirdest thing. I thought it was a load of crap, and I dismissed it. And then, and then I tried it, or someone else told me about it, and I gave it a go. And here I am now training people in it and teaching people in it. Um, but and sorry, the other thing I'd say is the amount of times you work with a client who's like, "Fine, I'll give it a go," and then their response is, "Holy crap! Like I've carried this thing for 10 years, and what do you mean in an hour session? Sometimes in an hour session you're done. It's gone. Sometimes it requires a few more sessions, uh, and then how many of them then go on to train in clinical EFT and share it with friends as well. And where I learnt it from was this incredible woman. She's an American woman, Dr. Laurie Layden. That was kind of how I really came across it. Who got her two kind of, I don't want to reduce her to this, but her two kind of big stories that got me interested were she was invited over to Rwanda to work with head of household orphan survivors of the genocide, and basically plopped in a rural community and went, all right, help people deal with their trauma. And she went, all right, I'll teach them tapping. And, they had a huge reduction in PTSD symptoms, to the point where they basically changed that community's life. And then at the same time, not that I want to bring up any, kind of distressing memories for any of the USA audience, but Then around the same time was the Sandy Hook shootings, um, and Laurie got asked to go and coordinate the response there, and again had a huge impact um, over there. And so when you see EFT in those in those settings, when you see it in kind of rural uh, Indigenous communities, when you're working with clients that have done so much therapy and gone, nothing works, so I'm willing to give this weird tapping stuff a go, and you see the physiological signs of stress moving, the yawning, the tears, heat, sweat, um, kind of down regulating the breathing and blood pressure. And then you hear the cognitive shifts coming from them rather than me as the therapist trying to help them make sense of the situation or think of it different. But as you watch the stress come down and their own brain resources them, their own brain kind of comes up with a cognitive shift and it sticks, you kind of go, this works. And look, I still have moments when I have the kind of miracle sessions, as I call them, which is not every session, but when there's such a profound shift in such a short amount of time, like I still have moments where I go, how the heck does this work? Like all I'm doing is tapping, and there's a bit more to it than just tapping. Um, but most clients come in thinking this isn't going to work. How's this going to work? And then it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll share with you, if I may, a story recently where one of my clients, whose story I have permission to share, by the way, today, because I told her, I said, I really want to be able to share this with my friend. He's going to be on the show, um, and it leads me to my next question. So, we were working with her. She was, dealing with some really intense trauma responses. Um, uh, she had SAPTSD. She was really struggling and had was a single mom with a brood of kids that were all over the place with
Mm,
different issues they were going through because they were traumatized at the same time that their mother was traumatized, and depending on their ages, had different kind of manifestations, everything from seemingly being on the spectrum to really, horrible behavioral issues. And so, in talking with her and talking with a person who came with her that she's uh, close with, their response was that first of all, this sounds really ridiculous. It doesn't sound like it's going to work. Even therapy with some of the best psychologists didn't work, and their psychiatrist was the one who referred them to me, and they said we're only here because we trust the psychiatrist, and they really tried. They gave it their best, but it didn't work. And so I was strictly focused on helping her. um, we worked together 3 times a week for the last 2 months, and the last time, and then I didn't hear from her. She didn't rebook, wasn't answering. The platform that I was working with um, is one in which clients get their access to my services through their company. So I assumed
mm,
that her company didn't renew their contract, so she no longer had access to me. And then I got an email the other day from her telling me that not only is she doing better, not only is she finally working again, because she's not paralyzed by the fear, paralyzed by the all of the symptoms of what she was calling chronic fatigue syndrome,
mm,
um, but her kids started to see her doing this, and they started to do it, and like she said, well, I'll be watching um, the show because she realized that her kids, without she didn't explain anything to them, she didn't, some of them were too young to know where their hippocampus is. Some of them were too young to know what the prefrontal cortex of the brain is.
mm.
Cortisol, they're just kids, so they didn't have to know how it worked for it to work. And
Yeah.
she said, I got an entirely new family, the family dynamic. She said, I'm gonna, send you I'm new on iOS, a FaceTime request. because I want you to see these kids. And in the past, when I had done sessions with her, the kids were screaming and throwing things and just chaos in the back.
Yeah.
And there was like these kids, it looked like it was staged for a television commercial because these kids were sitting at the table, coloring, writing, doing their homework, whatever they were doing, and supporting and helping one another. And it really was like seeing another, an entirely different family. So my next question for you is I I have a closeout question about where you see the future of EFT going, but we'll save that for the moment. I'm trying to be mindful of the time, but if you wouldn't mind, talk about for those who are listening to this and saying this sounds really good. Um, I wanted to point out that if you watch, I know some people might get mad about this, but that's why I'm going to say it, not you. There are people who watch YouTube videos and hear some pretty crazy wackadoodle stuff, sometimes from people who've never even had any exposure other than they watched a Louise Hay video or whatever. Um, and so they think this is absurd. They don't want to look at it any different. They don't try it. They don't do anything. I just want to point out to people that I can promise you that is a completely different thing, to use a non-judgmental word, than than what clinical EFT is.
Mm.
So you're going to be doing an event coming up here really soon. Talk a little bit about that and talk about the who that would benefit.
Yeah.
Who is that course for?
Yeah. Yeah. And just to kind of touch on what you said then around maybe what's online, I also really want to honor some of the more well-known kind of names on the online tapping space because they have got it out there. They've piqued curiosity. A few of them are really great, and do amazing work. It's just different. It's doing something slightly different, and it has its place and its purpose. Clinical EFT is more up the end of the spectrum of around EMDR. Is probably its closest kind of parallel. What I would also say I personally love about clinical EFT as opposed to EMDR is exactly what you said about your client. Is once you teach someone clinical EFT, as in once you teach your clients, they can do it at home. They don't need you as a practitioner, because you're teaching them a skill in the process of helping them heal, and they can pass it on to whoever, whenever, the very basic protocols which are going to help. And then it does have this borrowed benefits effect, where their families pick up the tapping and all those types of things. So, but yeah, so I'm doing a training for my American friends, because so far most of the trainings have been in the Australian time zone. So we have some crazy Americans who get up at all hours of the night to in order to do the training. So I was like, oh, it's about time we do one for you guys. So it's the foundational practitioner training. So it's really for people who are already in the kind of helping spaces, in the health spaces. So we tend to get a lot of psychologists, counselors, allied health professionals, nurses, and we also get a number of coaches and kind of people in those fields. However, if you do have a general interest in becoming an EFT, specifically an EFT practitioner, you're also welcome. It is open, but it is mostly designed for people who are kind of in the helping industry already. So mostly I find I tend to train psychs and counselors, social workers, and then and coaches are the main people who come to the trainings. And what it will do is give you a deep dive into what is clinical EFT, what is the science behind it, what can we say. We look at brain images from Dr. Peter Stapleton. Maybe I need to have my brain checked. Looking at how it's actually shifting what we can see in the brain. And it gives you the foundational techniques to begin working with clients. We talk about the need to be really specific, how we do that in gentle ways, how we do EFT in ways that don't trigger our clients, because we don't need catharsis for healing. We can actually work with people in ways where they don't have to dive into their deepest, darkest traumas and tell us everything. We're just working with the nervous system and the body in order to bring that relief and healing. We do an amazing thing on using EFT for chronic pain from Dr. Peter's research. And probably the most fun part of the training, the whole training's fun, is we do EFT for food cravings. So Dr. Peter's main area of research in the beginning, she's shifted since, was using EFT for food cravings and weight loss. And a lot of her brain scan studies have been in that area. And it's really fun because you get to see in real time your brain shifting, your experience of something shifting in the moment. So we do that. Traditionally, it's done over 3 days, but online, 3 full days of tapping, 9 till 5, can be a little bit intense. So I split it up over 2 weekends. So it's 2 full Fridays and 2 half Saturdays, which I think also really helps with the learning and integration, because your brain gets a bit of a break in between for some more questions to come up. Yeah.
Well, and anyone who's looking for more information, the banner is at the bottom. You can go ahead and go to that banner. I had intended to open it up for questions, but I realized that we're at the 45 or 47-minute mark. Do you have 5 or 10 more minutes to hang out just in case?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask those. I will keep an eye on the questions coming in, and then put them on the screen, and we'll let Mitch answer your questions for you. If you happen to be watching this on the replay, because I do realize when the weather turns nice, the number of people who watch us live goes down dramatically, and the number of people who are watching us at 2 o'clock in the morning goes up dramatically as well. So if you're watching on the replay, go ahead and put those questions in the comments below, and either I will keep an eye on them, or if you tag Mitch in the comment, if it's on Facebook, you can have, he'll answer you maybe before I even see it. Mitch, are there other ways that people can get in touch with you? And as you're sharing those other ways, I'm going to put them on the screen. So you go ahead and talk for a couple minutes.
Yeah. So probably the easiest ways are on the socials. So you can just find me on Mitch Gainey on Facebook. Go stalk John Michael. You'll be able to find me. Uh, or Instagram. It's the same handle, just Mitch Gainey. And I also have a website, which is becomeproject.com.au, which is how you can work with me one to one, and also more about the trainings. They're probably the easiest ways to get in contact with me. That's me.
All right.
Yeah.
And so I'm not seeing any questions coming in, so I want to go ahead and thank you so much, Mitch. I hope you'll come back. And for folks who are who are considering learning more, who are considering what this might do for your practice as a coach, your practice as a therapist, a social worker, definitely check out the class. I think you'll we don't have anyone on the show that who we can embrace.
Mm.
That's why people ask all the time, have you never had so and so on? Well, we have people on that we resonate with, that we connect with, and so uh, it's a pleasure to see you. Craig said, make sure you tell Mitch I said hello,
Hey,
um,
Craig.
and and I hope that that folks will go ahead and reach out, find out more about you. Thanks for being on the show,
Thanks
folks
for
that are
having me.
watching. Thanks for watching. And remember, you can ask questions in the comments below when we're over. So I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Mitch, you
See
stick
ya.
around. I'll be right with you.